Chris Miles, thank you so much for coming on the Inner Edison Podcast. Appreciate you being here today.
Hey, appreciate you having me on.
No problem. Sorry, it's cold here in Modesto, California. Everybody's under the weather because of all the fog we've been having and the wetness.
Mm-hmm.
Where are you out of?
I'm in Utah, and yeah, we haven't as much fog, but we've actually been warmer than usual. But still, like for me, it's still too dang cold. Even when I spent Thanksgiving down in Southern California, I was like, man, why is all this fog? Why can't it warm up? It's like I'm cold everywhere I go.
Southern California is kind of a big place. I used to be down in San Diego for over 20 years. So we're in Southern California.
Yeah, I was down in Encinitas. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. North County.
North County.
Yeah, that's where. So I never say. Most people have no idea where Encinitas, Carlsbad, Rancho Santa Fe, Del Mar, where those places are. But if you say San Diego, they kind of. And it's like, I live in San Diego. Where do you live? Oh, I live in Escondido. You don't live in San Diego.
No, you're out east.
Yeah, you're in the desert. If you're gonna live in the desert, you might as well live anywhere.
That's right. You might as well be in Temecula at this rate,
or Fallbrook.
Yeah, there you go. Yep. Yeah. No, actually, I was really hoping for good sunny weather. I'd even joined like the Encinitas Turkey Trot. I thought, oh, it'd be so beautiful running along the beach in the sunny weather. And then I'm running along there, and of course it's foggy, can't see a thing. I'm like, all right, well, I guess I'll just deal with the fog.
Yeah, so I was many years in Oceanside because I was stationed at Camp Pendleton.
Oh yeah,
and it was always 70 degrees overcast during the summer. When I was out and I'd go from the coast to where we had our office in Escondido, it was you go from 70 to 95 to 100. Every mile that way is a difference in a degree of temperature.
So true. More inland you go, the better the weather gets, right?
No, I prefer the coast.
You still like that coastal air?
Yeah, because during the summer it gets warm and then it cools off in the evening. Before you get a jacket on in the evening. Yeah, where I'm in Modesto, California, Central Valley, it gets 110 and then it cools down at night to 70, 65, which is
more like that desert.
It takes forever to get there.
Yep.
But enough about our weather that we've been talking about. Before we got going, we were talking about you had a podcast, but I kind of want to get into your background a little bit before we get into that whole thing about your podcasting, because you've been doing it about longer than I've been doing radio, because I didn't start all this till 2018, but you started in 2008. And we were talking, you were saying how you used it to help educate your clients, to have them look at stuff. And that's the same reason people do YouTube videos and everything else today. How can you get that information out there so people can find it and then come to you afterwards after they've seen some of your stuff?
Right.
And that's kind of why you started. But what's your background? You were a financial planner and then you gave that up, or financial advisor?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I wasn't like a finance major in college or anything. In fact, I was a sociology major with a triple minor in psychology, Japanese, and ballroom dancing. Right. So, a little bit. I was a Renaissance
weaving in there. No basket.
Yeah, I could have, right? At that rate, I could have probably done it. I probably had almost too many credits. They wouldn't even let me graduate.
Yeah. Well, people don't realize financial planners back in the day, 20 years ago or 10 years, didn't have to have a degree.
That's right.
They didn't even have to have any certification. Right. Well, they still got to pass that, they should have it. They should have it. If they're going to tell you how to control your money and other things, they need to know how to control money and other things.
Right. Exactly. Oh, I totally agree. Well, and that's the thing. You still had to get licensed. You still had to pass all the tests and everything, to
Series 7 licensed. Yeah.
Yeah. And I did that. I did that. It was like 23 years ago, right after 9/11 is when I became a financial advisor. So great timing to be in the market, and so I did
sarcasm. Was that sarcasm?
A little bit of sarcasm. Yeah. Just a tiny bit. Right. And it was good if you want that trial by fire, because it wasn't easy to get in. So things did get easier as time went on. But, I only went in because I wanted to learn how to use money myself. I want to learn how to invest and be better and create more wealth, because my family never taught me that. It was always about, we can't afford this. We think I am made of money. Money doesn't grow on trees, all that kind of crap that you hear growing up. So I wanted to do something different. And about 4 years in, my dad then asked me, he said, well, when are you going to advise me? And I never thought he would ask, because, he's the kind of guy that always kept his money really guarded. He never wanted me to know how much he had or whatever. So I sat down with him for the first time, saw that he'd saved money in his 401k and got the match and everything like good boys and little girls should, right? Mm-hmm. And he even paid off all his debt, including his house, in 18 years. So he's super proud. He was debt-free. He'd been saving money. He said, Chris, I'm 61. I want to retire at some point because I think this job's going to kill me just from the stress alone. And as I looked at all of his money, I said, Dad, if you want to retire today, you better hope you die in about 5 or 6 years, because that's when you're going to run out of money. okay, that's not what I wanted to hear. What do I do then? I don't know. You did it all right. Like you're in the market just like I teach, you're debt free. You're like Dave Ramsey's little poster child, you know, and I mean, I I don't know what to tell you.
And
And
don't get me started on Dave Ramsey, so keep moving.
oh, don't worry. We'll rip on him in a little bit here, but
I mean, I believe in a lot of stuff he talks about, but the whole cutting up your credit cards, that's the easiest way. If you're
Mhm.
an alcoholic, you don't drink. But if you're a
Right.
credit holic and you can't handle them, cut them up. But for the average person who can eventually pay that off, and then you need them to get the best things on credit and everything else.
Oh, for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, he's a lot of stuff he teaches is kind of full of crap. I mean, like you said, the budgeting stuff, great. You know, have an emergency fund, good. You know, even though he could probably have a bigger one than what he suggests. But yeah, everything else when it comes to growing your money, creating wealth, don't listen to him. But do watch what he does, which is kind of interesting topic too. But anyways, I mean, going back to my dad, I mean, I didn't want to like just throw him in any kind of stock market thing, this or that, because I didn't know if the market goes down, I don't want to be blamed. And so it bugged me. And for a few weeks, I didn't know what to do. I was starting to feel a little bit of that confidence wavering in what I was teaching as a financial advisor because come on, I mean, I was on the same path as him and I saw my future and it didn't look good. And this is like all my other clients that I'm selling them on hopium. You know, they're like smoking away on that little hopium, hoping that someday they'll have something. And it's not even work for the guy that's supposed to have it all done correctly. And so a few weeks later, I'm talking with a friend who left. I trained him to be a financial advisor, but then he quit to go do real estate investing. So we're chatting a little bit, and he's like, "Well, how many of your clients are actually financially free where they don't worry about money every day?" I said, "Well, they all worry about money. Even the retired ones still worry that they'll run out of money too soon." Okay, great. Well, how about you? This? How many of you guys as financial advisors are financially free, not off the commissions you're earning, but actually doing these investments? And when I started to realize there's guys in my office working there since the 1970s and they still couldn't retire either, I knew there was a problem. And so I said, I don't know, none. He said, there's your problem, Chris. And I said, well, give me the answer. No, I won't, because you just argued with me that stocks are better than real estate. I'm like, no, come on, I'm listening. Give me something. All right, go get this book, Who Took My Money by Robert Kiyosaki, that pretty much says mutual funds suck.
Right.
And then go listen to this AM talk radio show, you know, and just like you're doing, right? This talk radio show, these two real estate investors that bantered more about founding fathers and wealth principles than they ever did about real estate investing. And that's kind of where I started. And after a few months, I realized I had a choice. Either I stay the path and just put blinders on and just keep moving forward and trying to keep my profession going in the financial world, or I quit and keep my integrity intact. So I chose the latter. And of course, at that point, I didn't know what I was going to do. So I was basically a mortgage broker because 2006 mortgage brokers were easy. They were a dime a dozen, just like 2021 was for mortgage brokers. And I was doing that. I was doing.
I'm a mortgage broker, by the way.
Oh, awesome. So there you go. You survived though. That's the difference. You're still here.
Right. The difference is I learned how to be the authority in the industry versus just be somebody in the industry.
Yeah. You weren't just a commodity, right? Yeah, exactly. And so I was doing that. I was even a stock coach on the side and stuff, but I wanted to know what these guys knew. I wanted to know how they did real estate investing. And especially because I realized it wasn't about accumulating this huge nest egg to then live on less than the interest like they teach you in financial advising. It was all about income and cash flow. And so I started to do the same thing, started to invest in real estate. The next thing I know, I was able to retire when I was 28, almost 29 years old. And I thought, well, crap, now what? Like that was almost way easier than I thought. I thought I have to save a couple $1,000,000, live on less than the interest at 3% or whatever, you know, and then I can live on my $60,000 a year for life. But the truth is, I'm like, wow, this is different because it's all about the income. And so then I kind of wondered what to do with my time and everything. So in 2007, I came out of retirement to actually teach people how I did what I did, you know, before the market crashed and things got really interesting at that point too.
Well, that's how most people made their money during the crash. I'm telling you, most people made their money during the crash. A lot of people lost money,
Yeah.
but the people who were buying during the crash made a lot of money. I
So
know a lot
true.
of people in my town who they were buying, about 500 homes
Yeah.
because we
Oh,
were we were a Bay Area bedroom, so we were number one to go under,
yeah.
and people were picking them up cheap.
Oh, yeah. No, it was a great time. Unfortunately, I didn't have any cash left because I was going
I
broke.
understand. I understand. Mortgage broker too.
But I wish, right? I mean, that's the thing is that's when I started to realize I was still a little bit of a gambler in my mindset back then, because I was late 20s. I was still young and dumb in my mind. I know some people may not think they're young and dumb in their late 20s, but looking back, I realized that I didn't really know what I was doing. I rode a nice market wave, and I actually went from millionaire to upside down millionaire during that recession, which means I was over $1 million in debt. As my real estate values tanked, our business was tanking. I was throwing money into that, but not getting paid. So, I
Well,
mean, that
what
was
was your business?
our business. We were actually coaching people how to get out of the rat race. Ironically enough, we came out in 2007. We were primarily focused on the market of flippers, people that
Okay.
flipping properties. And they were the first ones to get affected in 2007 because the credit market started to quietly tighten up. And I watched it firsthand because, for example, I was a mortgage broker back then. I figured if I just dump in equity into my house, who cares? Because I can always just get it back out.
Nope.
Because back in 2006, we had negative amortization loans and all kinds of stuff we could do. That anybody with a heartbeat could get a cash out refi, even up to 100% of value. And definitely not that way anymore. It's like the wild, wild west of mortgages. But then, of course, when 2007 happened, I remember July of '07, I went to the bank. My property had appreciated. I said, "Hey, can I get a cash out refi? Can I get some of this money out?" They said, "Oh, you know what? Just get your credit score up 2 more points, and then we'll rerun it in August and do it." So I did. The score went up naturally. Just had to pay on time. That wasn't hard. And then August of 2007, I go in. They said, "Oh, we just changed the rules last week. If you do X, Y, and Z, then we'll give you the loan." So I did everything they asked. September rolls around. My credit score's still up there. I did everything they asked. And then I go in. I'm like, let's get this done finally. They said, "We're sorry. We now no longer do cash out refis, especially if you're a business owner." And that's when you start to see everything crumble, right? That's when you
Yep.
started here. Eventually, like the next year, you had Bear Stearns, everything. Oh, by the way, my mortgage was also owned by Lehman Brothers, who refused to let us short sell the house because eventually the value dropped. I tried to short sell the house at this point, even though I had 150,000 equity. It was all gone by the time the values dropped. And as I'm trying to short sell, they said no, even though we had offers. Eventually, they foreclosed on me in 2009, just a week before my fourth child was born. So I had to, pay $2,000 and rent just to stay in the house so we could have a baby and then move out while my wife was experiencing postpartum and everything. I mean, it was a rough time. I mean, it was hard to get through that. I stopped teaching people how to get out of the rat race because I was in it. I couldn't teach something I wasn't doing. So instead, I started teaching people how to really how to get resourceful, right? Like how to find money when they didn't know they had it or they didn't know where to find it. And that's what I started to help people do instead. And that's what eventually took off in 2009, so that it actually pulled our company almost out of bankruptcy, to the point where we made millions and millions the next year. And so that's what kind of helped me dig out of the hole. I could have gone bankrupt. It would have been easier financially to do so. I didn't realize my credit score would be better if I went bankrupt than I did the long, hard way of paying back, all these loans and judgments and collections over the years. But eventually I did. I went from like a 510 credit score in 2010 to like an 830, whatever, after that, nowadays. But I mean, it was a long, hard battle to get to that point where eventually I was able to retire the second time in 2016.
Yeah, that was a very challenging time in the housing market. But as I
Mhm.
said, people who weren't in the housing market, who had nothing to do with the housing market, and had jobs and had other investments, made a lot of money during that period
Oh
of time.
yeah.
Any of those things is an opportunity, as any of the things we go through. Just like right now, what we went through the last couple of years has been an opportunity for some people, but
Mhm.
and not for some. You know.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, I mean, and that's unfortunate, but that's just how it is. And I lived through that whole thing, went through the same thing, but I stayed in this industry because I like the mortgage industry. I know it's tough, but I've learned to do other things, like have other sources of income, you
Mhm.
know, like coaching and books and all those other things you can do so that you could, do this.
That's right. That's one thing. That's one mistake I did make. In 2007, when we started that new business, we had several partners in that business, and I had streams of income coming in from my rentals and stuff. Right, I was lending money and getting paid off that. So I was doing a lot of real estate that way. I was also a more, because I had a mortgage license. I realized I didn't have to be the one doing the actual apps. I could actually refer it to a nerd to do all the work for me, which was a huge epiphany. I didn't think I could do that because I was always the do-it-yourselfer. When I realized, like, wait, I can get them to do all the work, then I'm like almost making residual income from mortgages because I just pass them along and let them do all the work. So I was doing that and several other things that were paying me multiple streams of income, and it was really very abundant, in that period of time. But then, of course, some of the partners said, "Hey, I know you got these other things going on here. Get rid of all those. Just go all in on this company. So mistake number one is I cut off all my different streams of income, even my passive ones, because I was trying to be a team player. And then secondly, the other mistake I made was, of course, that I didn't have as many reserves as I thought. I thought I had good reserves, and it was okay, like 6 months reserves, but that didn't matter in that period of time. You needed like 12 to 24 month reserves to really weather that storm.
And that's how it actually been in the last 2 years, because I
Yeah.
had enough reserves. I booked, from 2021 and all the stuff I went through. We're going to cause the housing market to collapse to where only like 40% of the people will be selling their homes going forward. I was off by 5%.
Yeah.
I had a ton of reserves, but not to last as long as this one is needed to be lasting, because this is going into 25, and this is
Yeah.
as of end of 22, we started seeing the difference, October of 22.
Yep. And those bond rates are nice and sticky, right? They're keeping those mortgages from coming down. Everybody's like, "Why aren't they coming down? The Feds lower the rate." Well, that's nice for a HELOC, but that doesn't
Or
do
credit
jack squat for the 30-year fixed.
or credit cards. And that's the problem, is
Yeah.
people don't realize credit cards interest rates are up to 29% right now.
Yeah.
It's ridiculous how expensive they are. And that's
It
why
is.
one of the things they're talking about, Trump's thinking about, capping that at 10%. And everyone's like, can he do that? It's like, why not? It's usually for us to do a rate too high on someone's house. So why is it okay to do a credit card at 30% or 27%?
Exactly.
That's
Yeah.
usury. I don't care what they say.
No, it is. I mean, it's just because you can get it doesn't mean you should, right? Even
Correct.
just like when I lend to real estate investors, I know I could probably get a lot more money because bank rates have still been high for them, but I generally don't charge more than like 10 to 15%. I'm not going to go up in the stratosphere of 20s to 30% like some people try to milk them for, right? It's like, no, just give me the standard 10 to 15% you were paying even when the rates were lower.
So you do private money.
Yeah. I don't raise it, but I like to be passively invested in other people's stuff. That's the difference between then and versus now. Is I realized I was a horrible active real estate investor. I was a horrible property manager. I always had the sucker's heart. Somebody gave me a good story why they couldn't pay me rent. I would just buy it. I wouldn't enforce anything, and I'm much better. Just like, here, let's get a property management company to do all the work. Hey, let's put the money with people that actually are going to spend all the time working and flipping that property. Just pay me my interest, and I'm good.
And so when did it change for you?
Going
Because
from active to
well,
passive?
when you actually, to pull yourself out of it, out of
Yeah,
the
I mean, definitely when 2009 into 2010, as we started to make more money as a company, obviously I can actually pay myself a paycheck again. That was nice. And so, because I went from welfare, and getting creditor calls all day long, multiple times a day, to finally like starting to pay off some of those debts. So I started there. I started focusing on trying to pay down those debts. Once I got more manageable and I had more positive cash flow, then I started building up savings. And that's when I started to like buy real estate properties again. And this is where I did it differently. So like mid 2010s, I was more buying, rentals where I knew that somebody else would manage the property for me. I could buy anywhere in the country because, just like you, I mean, I live in the western half of the United States. Rentals are horrible out here. I mean, you don't make good profit on these at all for years. But if I go out to Southeast, Midwest, man, it's like they're cheaper. They make good rent. You make good profit. And if I have a property management company out there, then I don't have to babysit it, right? I don't have to deal with the tenants, the toilets, and the trash. They deal with it. If it's a big issue, they let me know. But for the most part, it's just sit around and wait for them to, pay each month like we usually do.
Yeah, I think the biggest problem people got into during the up until 2006 was people would buy rental properties and not look at the cash flow. They would look at the
Exactly.
appreciation they would make off of it. You don't buy
Mhm.
investment properties for the appreciation. And this happened with multifamily in 2020 and 2021. People were buying all these multifamilies and getting adjustables on them and not a Fannie Mae fix that you can get on them. And now all those things are coming due to where they don't pencil anymore. And
Yep.
you're going to see a huge amount of those coming on the market still.
Oh, totally. I was actually having a conversation with another mortgage broker about that. And he's a real estate investor. He's done it for a long time. He's like, man, the appreciation, that's where you make the money. The cash flow doesn't matter. I'm
Yeah.
like, that's stupid. I mean, I made that mistake in 2006. I did the same thing when I sold off my starter home, sold it to an investor at full appraisal so I could strip the equity out and then turn around and leased it back from him. But then I subleased it to a renter, right? So I was able to sell my house, strip out the equity, and then essentially rented out to make rent, but the cash flow was horrible. And especially when that person wasn't paying me, it was even worse. And there was even times like, I remember with real estate, it's like, well, even if I'm a little bit negative cash flow, there's so much appreciation, we'll make up for it, especially if you buy it with little to no money down, right? If you do it that way, then you get this mass multiplier effect. And although that's true,
Right.
you can never ever bank on appreciation. Appreciation should be like the icing on the cake, the cherry on top, right?
It's
But
dividends.
yeah, exactly. But the cash flow, the profit, that's what gives you long-term health. And so you asked me like what changed? That's a big one. Like the big one I was focused on was how do I ensure I get paid more? How do I make sure that this is profitable, that I'm going to actually get paid? And I care more about the cash flow now than I do about a possibility of a big payout later. And it's not that I won't do those growth plays, as I call them, versus cash flow plays, but when you're trying to bank on later, and you saw this, I mean, you've been seeing this. I mean, even the multifamily space, right? The last 2 years, they've been kicked in the teeth, and
Mhm.
all of them were saying like, "Hey, in 5 or 6 years, we're going to refinance this, or in 3 years, we're going to refinance it, pay all our investors back, and then we'll sell it in 6 years, and you'll double your money." And they all looked like they copied the same pro forma off of each other, right? So it's like, oh yeah, you'll make like 16, 18, 20% IRR and all this kind of stuff, and it's like, no, like that's all speculation, right? That was all based on current market conditions, and none of us could really foresee interest rates skyrocketing as fast and as hard and fast as they did. But still, like it's still a gamble when you're trying to focus on appreciation. I want to know, even if I don't get the appreciation, will I still get paid?
Right. And because you want it, because appreciation comes over time, and then
Mhm.
that's what you want. But that's not what you need to, like you said, you focus on. Because if you focus on that, you're going to mess up.
Yeah.
And going forward, I mean, the 5% increase in interest rates, I didn't see 5%. I'm used to maybe 1.5 to 2% on a bad time for 18 months. No big
Yeah.
deal. People are still doing certain things. But 5% kind of puts a huge stop in a market. And especially when it's when someone has a 2.5 or 3%, and now the rate's 8, they don't want to do anything. Nobody, only 35% of the market's changing hands. That's death, divorces, and job transfers. And the whole job transfer stopped too, because they're like, if I can't afford a home where I'm moving to, I'm not moving.
That's right.
Yeah, and people, it's a huge difference out there. I knew once the pipeline was shut down, the moment Biden did that, that we're going to have inflation. I just knew. I knew
Mm.
the things they were doing was going to cause that. What we're
Yeah.
worried about right now is we're currently in 1970s, right after Carter, and Paul Volcker had to do what he had to do with inflation, and they're afraid that that's what's going to happen is inflation is going to kick back up again, and then
Mhm.
it's going to get even worse. And that's why people are like, well, why doesn't the Fed just lower the rates? Just do this, do that. They can't. They're afraid of what we just went through because we had a administration that was spending so much money,
Mhm.
and you can't. I tell people it's like being on a budget. You got a husband and wife. If they're on the budget, great. But if you only have the wife on the budget and the husband's not on the budget, it doesn't work. Same thing here. You had
Yes.
administration spending and the Fed trying to do their thing. It wasn't working. It didn't work. It just happened to work. But if
Yeah.
you look at even in the last PPI, where you saw eggs and fruits and vegetables made up 2/10 of a increase in the inflation, that's huge.
Yeah.
Yeah, especially
No, it's
eggs. Eggs was 1/10. It's like eggs was 1/10.
that's not
Jeez.
1/10 of anybody's budget. Why would it be, right? And
Yeah.
well, even when they talk about inflation, I mean, that's 25% of it's all, like you said, government spending. That has nothing to do with the health of the economy. That's just really just right. It's just like living on credit cards when you deal with government spending, right? That's
Government would spend 1 billion to prop up everything, and then we would get 600 million for what they did.
right.
They threw away 400 million every month to offset the numbers to show that we were doing better.
That's why I'm all about lower taxes, right? Because
Mhm.
I know, just like like I'm not saying this is across the board true with everybody, but the more money that a business owner has in their pocket, the more money they're going to make with it, right? They're going to expand and grow the economy, not the government. The government, you give them $1, they come back with 20 cents. Like
Look at the
they're
post
just,
office. It lost 2 billion.
I know.
How much more do we gotta get? We just need a little bit more money. Just a little bit more no, we need somebody to go in there and cut all this stuff.
Yeah,
And
exactly.
that's what I think a lot of people are so for the future is going to be better because they're going to be cutting the government, cutting certain things, going through things, making it more efficient. Just what we need.
Mhm.
We need a leaner stuff. It's like when we run a company, I can't run it at $1 million deficit. I go broke, but a government can because they can just say we'll get more taxes in.
Right.
We'll just tax our, we'll actually just, and if you look at the 80s, if you, I was young then, but I just know this, from when they would go after people for taxes to get taxes because that's how they made their money to cover stuff.
Mhm.
And they had huge IRSs up until the 90s that would go after people drastically.
Yeah.
And then that changed with the different administrations, and it just was coming back again. We don't
Mhm.
want that. Just give us a flat tax for
Yeah.
personal and be done with it.
Make it
No
easy on us.
deductions, flat tax, we're done.
Yeah, I remember hearing, was it Herman Cain, I think, that brought that up in the 2016 election, and I thought, "That's brilliant. Why haven't we heard about this more?" But,
Because
it
they
is what
don't
it is.
want that. They want a difficult thing so it's, the each side wants to complain about things, but the whole
Mhm.
thing about taxes is, you're gonna give me loopholes to be able to get out to not pay taxes and do this, but don't
Mhm.
complain that you put those in the tax code.
Exactly. Exactly.
And if you're doing real estate, I did a guy who does multifamily, and he made $2 million, but it looked like he made nothing because all
Mhm.
his profits goes back into the next one he's doing. And that was the whole thing about Trump and how he did his taxes and everything else. You can't complain about how people do real estate when that is the tax code.
Exactly. Yeah, you're gonna try to depreciate and write off everything you possibly can. Same thing with business owners. I
Mhm.
remember people getting so mad at Warren Buffett, for getting a lower tax rate than his executive assistant. Well, it's like, of course, it's exactly what's intended for. I mean, and there's something to be said. I mean, if you know psychologically, this is not the case, obviously in current America, but if you knew psychologically that you could make more money and your tax rate would get lower, how many more people would try to make more money instead of trying to stay in poverty, right? Because staying in there, I remember, especially in the last 4 years, I mean, so many people wanted to stay in poverty just because they were like, well, if I don't, then my taxes go up,
Mm.
or
I
I
have
get
to
this big of a
work.
tax turn, or I won't get the government benefits anymore, right?
Yeah, I run into that on my end. Not a lot, but I have people who are like, "This is how much I make, and I'm on this, and this," and of course, it's not income, it's the other income, and I'm like,
Yeah.
"Okay, you don't qualify for a house." "Oh, why not?" "It's because 'cause you're not working." That's supposed to be that's support, not actually enough to you have to make 120 grand a year now to own a 450 to $500,000 house, which is the average home in small town California.
Right. Well, don't give the government an excuse to now say, you know what, people can't afford a home anymore. We should be better. We should up their monthly benefits now. It's like, no, we just need to get out and work.
No, they don't want you. So the monthly benefits are supposed to just get you through and then
Right.
move on, just like McDonald's wasn't supposed to be a long time gig unless you own the place.
That's right.
Yeah,
No, I'll
or
tell you,
manage.
like, I mean, I was on welfare, like I said, like during the 2007 crisis and stuff, for a time. And I'm grateful it was there, right? I was grateful that my family didn't have to starve, that at least we had food covered. Couldn't make my house payment. We had to downsize a house that was like a quarter of the payment, which it worked. But it wasn't a permanent situation. It was more like, okay, I'm broke. I'm not poor. I'm just temporarily broke. I need to get myself out of this situation as soon as I can. And I think if every American did that, this would be a very different country. We wouldn't be spending the money we're spending in the government, and therefore we would be taxed as much as we'd be taxed, or going into, growing our $1 trillion of debt as fast as it would be if we would just focus on what can I do to be self-reliant as much as I can. Yes, I've got a fail safe, at least, where I do have people that might step in to help out, but I don't want that to be a lifetime thing. I don't want that to be my lifestyle. I want to have something where it's just gives me that step up. Kind of like Cinderella Man. If you saw that movie, I kind of like his attitude where he took that, the first prize winning money he got from the boxing match, he paid back Social Security office. I never did that. I figured if I just get taxed enough and I make enough money, I'll eventually pay it back that way versus going in and dropping a bunch of wad of cash in the office. But I think that's that kind of attitude, saying like, no, that's good for me. Now I can pay it forward. I think I love that attitude.
Yeah, I think that's a great idea. But we need to excuse me a second. I need to change something real quick. All right. So what are you doing now? I mean, I know you're retiring. I assume you're coaching and other stuff right now, helping people still buying properties and stuff like that.
Exactly. Every time I want to retire, everybody always says, "How did you do it? How can I do it too?" And so, and that's true. I mean, I know I could just be happy with my family, go go live on the beach or whatever it might be, and I mean, somewhere like beautiful Modesto, which is not a beach, but
And it's not beautiful.
not beautiful. Um, it's
The
cool
college
though.
area is where I am, but yeah, it's
Oh
not
yeah,
definitely not Carlsbad or
definitely not
Encinitas.
Carlsbad.
Yeah.
But like I could always do that, but I kind of feel like it's almost like the Spider-Man thing, which is, where with great power comes great responsibility. I feel the same way. I feel like we all have a stewardship. We're all supposed to use our time and our talents and our resources for good. And I just don't think it should be like a consumption type of lifestyle. It should be somewhere you do give back, more of a producer lifestyle or a creator lifestyle. So that's where it's like, well, what would I do? Like what's the thing that I love doing regardless of the money? And that's teaching. Just like what we're doing right now. Like I love doing my Money Ripples podcast. I love coming on great podcasts like your own, and just sharing and helping give people hope, right? Inspire that hope of something that they never thought was actually possible because you've been taught by financial advisors for years that you're supposed to set it and forget it, sock it away for someday. And hopefully you'll have something at some point once you let it sit there and grow at whatever rate, or it might shrink depending on the years too. And you hopefully have something at someday. And then you end up like my dad, who just doesn't have enough, right? And every one of the clients I was working with, not let alone. I mean, so it wasn't. And by the way, the clients I worked with, some people have kind of come on YouTube saying, "Oh, what does that say about Chris? Like, obviously, he sucked as an advisor." Just so you know, these were also clients I inherited from decades of previous advice from other financial advisors. So just so you're aware, it wasn't just me; it's everywhere,
But
And
you have
so
to
that's what I
also
want to do.
I know, but you also have to add in that some people like nurses and certain companies and certain people, they get a 401k, 403b, but they also get a pension. There's a lot less of them, but there's a lot of those people who they're okay with that. But if you don't have a
Mhm.
pension, if you don't have, and you're responsible for your own 401k, 403b, or IRA, uh, you need to look at other forms of income just to protect yourself because you don't know if that company might not be there.
That's right.
My wife works for Kaiser. She's a nurse there, and I don't have to worry about that because nurses always have a job no matter what.
Mhm.
Yeah, and as
True.
everybody gets older, they need more and more of those people. So,
Yeah, there's so few of those even left anymore, right? I mean, unless you're a government worker, teacher, nursing, or something like that, it's
yeah,
very,
teachers
very
don't make
hard.
enough.
Yeah,
Teachers do not make enough.
yeah, you're pretty much on your own, right? I mean, Social Security, we don't even know if we're even going to get as much of the benefit. They're already predicting by 2033 they're gonna have to cut it back like 70% or something like that. But like I was actually talking to somebody on the interview about this too. I mean, yeah, I was teaching a class, right? Like a little retirement class for my neighborhood at one point. This is actually right before 2020 shut everything down. It was during 2020, early 2020. And they all knew my story that I'd retired twice by the time I was 39 years old and whatnot. But there was an older gentleman that was there too, who was definitely, very confident. He's in his early 70s. And so people would ask him advice like, hey, well, what did you do to retire? Because there were younger people asking the 70 something year old, and I was kind of, at first, my ego was like, hey, what the heck? Like, why are you asking the old guy? But then I was like, you know what? Whatever. It doesn't matter. If he can give good information too, it gives them hope. Right. And he was kind of more the traditional mindset, like, oh, yeah, you just save and, just keep doing what you're doing. Well, then March of 2020 happens, right? And the stock market's tanking. They start having this little panic session during one of our meetings. And they start asking him, like, well, is this affecting your retirement? Because I mean, the market's tanking fast. He said, well, not really, because one, I have Social Security. Two, I have a pension from a corporation I used to work for. Three, I also was a insurance broker. And so I'm getting paid still some insurance commissions from when I was an insurance broker. And then he's like, so really, I don't need the money. Oh, and he actually had a military pension too. So he had like four different streams of income on top of the money he had in the market. So he's like, well, really, I don't need any of the money in the market at all. I'm getting paid all these other pensions and streams. But yeah, I lost a lot of money in the last month. And you can see all of them kind of become crestfallen, like, oh, well, that's our only hope. We don't have all this pensions and military and,
But you can always
maybe
join
there's
the
Social
military.
Security.
You can always join the military.
That's right. It's never too late. They want you, but maybe. But
Well,
so yeah, that's the thing.
a lot of people are military who got out after 4 or 6 years don't understand about the disability that they have access to or when they should put in for that because if they don't feel the same they did as the day they went in, you got injured while you're in, you should be paid for that. And even myself, when I got out, I got a small little thing, but and now, in 30 years, 25 years later, there are so many people out there helping people get those now and make those
Mhm.
changes that even I'm going through it now. And the difference, I mean, you're talking 50 grand a year if you're 100% disabled. And 100% disabled does not mean you're not doing things. It just means
Mhm.
all these things add up to over
Yeah.
200 points to where you can get that money. And it's like, you need to go back to get that, because that is money that's for your future, help you with a stream of income. You can invest that in other stuff. There's so many
Mhm.
things. So you get all those things you can have access to.
Well, that's what happened with one of who became our client later on, a guy named Dan. He was actually the fourth highest ranking general in the California National Guard. And so he was at the point, he's 60 years old, retired, had $1 million. And then his financial advisor says, well, now you have $1 million, you can live on the 3% a year. And people used to say the 4% rule, right? And there's still people on the social media teaching that. I was like, 4% rule was debunked years ago. I mean, that rule was created by running numbers from 1926 to 1976, before gold was taken off standard in 1974. So inflation's higher. That's before people were living longer. It's like 3% is your best bet now, right? So the advisor actually told him 3%. He's like, well, that's 30,000 a year to live in California. No, I can't do that. And so he started looking around, found podcasts, found ours, and then as he reached out, he's like, I need to get this $1 million to produce more than that. And so we did different things. Like we got him to, he bought a few duplexes, right? That cash flowed as well. He went and he, invested a little bit in like an oil and gas investment that, pays him on business working interests and whatnot. And he even, got some like lending and things that he did on that front, and even some, apartment buildings, basically diversified in different spots to the point where it's generating over $100,000 a year. And that's the thing that I really enjoy doing now, is that just giving people something different, right? It's like realizing like, wait, that's even possible, because it's almost like stepping into the matrix. You just kind of live that world. You think that your only option is basically to stuff your money in your 401ks and IRAs. By the way, the 401k, the match is not 100% return, just so you know. It's more like a 2 or 3% return if you compound it over time. And most 401k funds actually underperform the stock market by at least 2%. So the match you get just barely makes up the bad performance. So you end up making as much money as you would have investing on your own anyways,
Right.
which that's a whole nother, myth of the match episode like I did before.
It's listen to Rich Dad Poor Dad. Listen to all his stuff. He'll tell you. You'll listen to it. It's just the same
Oh
thing he
yeah,
talks about. He's been talking about it forever. People just don't listen to it.
it's true. Well, and I even run numbers. Like that's why I did like the myth of the match episode on my podcast a couple times, because you got to renew it almost every year just to remind people, hey, the return you're getting is not awesome. You're not getting much of a return at all on this 401k. And that of course that doesn't make people any happier, because they've been putting all their chips into that one thing, and that's where we try to give an alternative. It's something different, something that allows their money to actually work harder for them, so you don't have to keep working so hard for that money.
And I mean, I'm big on especially veterans, because I do a lot with veterans, and I'm like, okay, you have a VA fund, a VA loan that you can buy some with no money down. Your
Yeah.
first lot should be a fourplex, period.
Mhm.
And technically you have to be there a year, but if you don't like it, doesn't mean you can't leave in 60 days. But you can't go in there going, I'm only going to be here for 30 days. You have to go in there that you're going to live there. And then your next, and I tell people, especially if you're in, from each duty station, you should be buying another
Yeah.
property at each transfer, because you can have multiple VA loans at the same time.
That's right. I love when I get clients that have veteran access. They can get VA loans because it's always way lower interest. It's almost, I remember when the interest rates were lower, and they're getting like dirt cheap, barely 2% or less. I was like, oh my gosh, like it's not even keeping up with inflation. I mean, you don't even want to pay that loan off, because your cheap, crappy dollars down the road are going to be able to pay that sucker off down the road anyways. So just let your cheap, deflated dollars, do that.
Yeah, because you can buy them with the VA and then eventually down the road refinance them conventional, so you
Yeah.
get your full VA back and keep doing it over and over and over again. Because like I said, the new Blue Water Act has changed everything. You can buy up to, most of them cap at 1.5 million, but you can buy up to like 2.5 million.
That's
With no money down.
incredible.
Yeah. But I mean, if you're buying multiple, they do it off of the conforming loan limit. So that's where you get the thing. So,
Yeah.
yeah. But yeah, it's a great program. There's a few guys, Buddy, I can't think of his name. He really focuses on vets to get them to invest their stuff. And it's different now. It wasn't like this 30 years ago or 20 years ago. The VA loan back then sucked. It was horrible. Excuse my language. It was the worst. I mean, you couldn't even buy convince anything. It was like 180,000 in 2005. The max loan you can get with it was like 180,000. It's like there
That's
was nothing
horrible.
around for that.
No, especially in California. If you're in California, especially, right?
Yeah, it was only off by like, I don't know, 100,000. No big deal, minimum. And not in San Diego. It was sad that back in the 90s in San Diego, you could buy a house for 250,000, and guess what? You could buy the same type of house up in like Modesto for 250,000.
It's crazy, huh?
But that house down there is now worth 2 million versus what it's worth here.
Easily.
Yeah.
I had one client actually down in San Diego that was one of the things he had. He had bought one of his very first rental property, and they were so emotionally married to it, right? They loved it. And he's like, yeah, like I'm just going to put my head down, aggressively pay off my home mortgage and this mortgage, and I'll be debt free in 6 years. I'm like, okay, well, let's run that out. Let's see what's that going to free up of actual principal and interest, not tax and insurance. That doesn't count. Principal and interest is $4,200 a month. That's like 50 grand a year. Not bad. But the problem was not even including his house, right? That was another sacred cow of his. But the rental property had 700,000 of equity in it. And I said, well, what's your actual cash flow, like net profit on this property? He said $200 a month. I'm like, do you realize that's like a 0.3% return on your equity? I mean, you could literally sell your house, put it into a CD, and make way more money. Now, I'm not recommending you do that, but we might want to do something with the equity. He's like, well, I don't want to do a cash out refi. I'm like, no, I don't think you need to. I think in this case, I mean, you could do that. In this case, that cash flow is so horrible. Even if you had it paid off, it's still only like cash flow $2,200 a month. So I was like, okay, no, like we can buy stuff out east for way cheaper, get a way better option there. You can, finance those if you want, or just seriously buy them all outright in cash, but use that 700 grand to buy more rentals out east. And so he did. He finally did. It took him 2 years to convince him because he was so married to that property. He's like, well, I just got to pay off the debt. It's like, no, just sell it. He sold it, bought about 6 rental properties in Louisiana, and then he started reinvesting the cash flow to the point where now he just reached out to me a few months ago and said, hey, now we're up to over $8,000 a month of cash flow. This would have been year 5. He would have been still 1 year away from paying off his mortgages. And now it's like he's got $8,000 a month coming in, and at least if he would have done it when I asked him, he probably would have been over $10,000 a month now versus $4,200 in 6 years.
Right. And it's a little bit harder right now with rates being higher to do exactly that, but they won't be here forever. What the opportunity you have now is to buy that place without the competition, and then eventually refinance it down. I helped a guy recently, and even in September, when rates dropped in September for that short period of time, I locked in so many people that one of them was saving almost $900 a month from buying the house a year earlier with that rate.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. So
I was telling people so much. I'm like, lock it. I was even saying that a couple of years ago. I'm like, lock it. And the people I did, I'm like, why? Like, we're watching these rates on a daily basis. That's so much. There's ebbs and flows, right? And just like now, we're seeing it skyrocket. After the Feds make their little announcement, but
it always does.
It always does. But I predict it's going to come back down, and it might come down another 0.5% in 6 months, possibly.
It's going to depend on Trump's 100 days, what he does in his first 100 days.
For sure.
And if they really want rates to drop, the best way to do it is make the T-bills, everything else tax deductible for people to invest in them. Then like other countries invest in them and they don't pay taxes. Why don't we allow us to do the same thing? People will use it as huge, quick investments, and we wouldn't have to worry about other countries buying it or our actual government buying them.
Right. No, that'd be awesome.
That would make a lot of money. All right, Chris, it was really nice having you on here. How do people find you, and where's your podcast at?
Yeah, just look up anything that's Money Ripples, whether it's moneyripples.com, at Money Ripples on social media, or the Money Ripples podcast on YouTube, Apple Podcasts, wherever you consume podcasts.
All right, Chris, thank you so much for being on the show today. Really appreciate having this time with you.
Same here, Ed. Really appreciate it.
All right, make it a great day.